ensure the ANC has requisite capacity to oversee and monitor the implementation of our deployed cadres within implementation of policy by our deployed cadres within the state. On policy issues and proposals on the macro configuration of the state, the ANC government established a constitutional framework within the architecture and configuration of a unitary state within a decentralized form of governance arrangement in 3 spheres of government. The Constitution provides for principles of cooperative governance across the spheres of government that are distinctive, interrelated, interdependent, and which bind and define their interface. Previous ANC policy conferences, NEC Makutla, NGCs, national conferences, and the NDP have emphasized the need for strengthening alignment in intergovernmental coordination and collaboration. We need a more predictable and coordinated system of how macro policies and priorities are set and translated into integrated planning instruments and how budgets are developed, deployed, and implemented within and across all spheres of government. The overall configuration of the executive should be dictated by policy outcomes and principles of good governance and efficiency in the configuration of departments. On the strategic center of governance, the conference will give momentum to the strategic center of governance deliberation. The President is the head of state and the strategic center of government and has the requisite powers and functions, including coordinating functions of state departments and administrations. The intention is to reconfigure and build capacity to drive strategic coordination, resource planning, and prioritization in line with the objectives of the developmental state and the National Development Plan. This will include alignment of the public service, the administration, intergovernmental relations, provinces, municipalities, and state-owned entities. On state planning, the centrality of integrated macro policy planning and coordinated implementation is affirmed and supported. Meeting these challenges requires a developmental state with modeling capability, planning, and an ability to anticipate the future and thus plan for it accordingly. The macro analysis of the state suggests that there are uneasy intersections and confluence of socio-economic, demographic, biological, and economic forces that portend a country at the crossroads. This calls for endeavors to shed light and assist in providing a line of sight into the future for those who are preoccupied with planning. The planning and enforcement capability of the state needs to be streamlined. A strategic center in this regard has become urgent. On provincial review, the Presidential Commission to review the powers, functions, and the number of provinces must be urgently established, as has been said in previous conferences. State implementation capability. The ANC has observed and raised serious concerns about the implementation and enforcement of government policies and laws. There is a growing evidence of weakness on the part of government to execute policy and legislation. This challenge is due to numerous factors, amongst others, the absence of accountability and consequences for non-delivery, lack of political power in certain instances, weak and poor administrative capacity, rather than the lack of resources. Unfortunately, this compromises the ability of the ANC to deliver and denies our people the better quality of life and quality services that the ANC denies our people better and quality services. The 54 National Conference will examine the effectiveness of governance and accountability mechanisms, including the role of Parliament in providing oversight. On cadre development policy, the several challenges of weak execution, accountability, and effective governance points to the lack of an inadequacies in our cadre development policy. The ANC must review its policy on cadre development and ensure that a deployed cadre have the requisite capacity to fulfill their mandates. This policy will apply to all ANC elected representatives, including members of cabinet, members of parliament, local government, and councillors. The thrust of the policy will be to emphasize accountability, effectiveness, support, and development. ANC elected representatives and employees must be appointed with a clear mandate to execute specific ANC policies and tasks, and as such must be held fully accountable. This policy must be coupled with a clear accountability framework which applies to all cadres deployed to lead the state at its various levels. The overall resolution on supporting the development of an accountability framework with effective monitoring and consequence management was supported. Through this, we must affirm and, where needed, restore our values. Relationship between party and state. The conference will also examine the relationship between the party and the state. This examination should be able to mitigate and minimize the impact of party challenges spilling into government and thus compromising the capacity and the capability of the state to deliver. Oversight role of Parliament. The oversight role of Parliament will be examined so as to ensure an ANC progressive, consistent agenda is implemented in Parliament. We want to ensure consistency and robustness of Parliament's oversight role. In addition to exercising oversight over the executive, Parliament must also turn its attention to matters affecting broader society. On the state of SOEs, the state of some of the SOEs calls for serious intervention to restore governance and prudential management. The conference will emphasize the governance and oversight protocols for SOEs. This will include how we empower the public to hold SOEs accountable, how legislatures play their role in tightening oversight and the executive taking full control in managing the portfolio of SOEs. On traditional leadership system, issues relating and regarding the traditional leadership system in South Africa have not been fully resolved since the 1994 democratic dispensation. Various engagements and consultations have ensued with traditional leaders represented by Contralesa in an effort to address this gap. The National Conference will make a specific concrete policy determination on the traditional leadership system and the role of traditional leaders in land governance and administration. On local economic development and unemployment, the levels of unemployment in South Africa have remained chronically and exceedingly high, especially among the youth. South Africa's multidimensional poverty index report has pointed to the contribution of unemployment as a driver of poverty. This has an impact on delivery and affordability of services. Public sector employment programs must be improved to ameliorate these conditions. The local economic development initiatives of municipalities become key in mitigating this challenge. Cities can play a vital role in building the local economy. Key to this is the provision of utility services for growing business needs. Reliability and supply of electricity remains a constraint. All cities have mechanisms to ensure municipal spending results in maximum economic impact. On urbanization and spatial planning, various studies estimate that nearly 80% of the total population will be living in urban areas around 2050. One of the biggest challenges of urbanization is the urbanization of poverty, which is increasing, especially in townships, informal settlements, and inner cities. There is a large part of the population that lives in dispersed and impoverished rural settlements, many of which are in the former apartheid homelands. In these areas, poverty and unemployment are high, and millions of people effectively rely on the state to meet their basic needs. On governance in cities, we will focus on energizing our base and ANC strongholds. This is particularly the case in Johannesburg, Tshwane, and Nelson Mandela Bay, which are under coalition governments. The National Conference will examine strategies to respond to the reversal of transformation and racist delivery strategies implemented through coalitions. Outcomes of high-level panel. The ANC has noted and appreciated the report of the high-level panel, which the ANC mandated the Fourth Parliament to establish. The challenges raised by the report and the implications on our society are taken very seriously. The high-level panel has confirmed the core issues that confront our country, namely poverty, land, inequalities, implementation, and governance. These issues will be discussed in detail at National Conference, and strategies to resolve the problems identified in the report must be and will be articulated. In conclusion, the main challenges of poverty, inequality, and land dispossession persist. The capacity and capability of the state is the most critical factor to the solution of these challenges. The central focus of our commission will be in our ability to plan, implement, enforce, monitor, and achieve the desired objectives. The core issues of governance, configuration of the state, the public service, efficiency and effectiveness of the administration, the framework for state-owned entities, and cadre development policy supported by a clear accountability framework. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Comrade Ayanda. I hope that the sound is better. Then there's a problem with your microphone then. While you sort that out, just to alert members of the media that Comrade Faith will leave at 2:30. So I think if there's any questions that we're going to direct to her in her area of deployment, we can do that. Yes, ma'am, sorry? Yeah, sure. All right, it's 2:15. I want to commend Comrade Ayanda to being the very first chairperson who stuck within the time that has been allocated for the presentation. For your benefit, we have also sent out the statement, so you should have it on your emails in case you just want to refer to that as far as the questions are concerned. We'll take the first round of questions. I will take at least 3 hands. If I could see hands just on the presentation. I've noted, and number 1 over there. Number 2. Can I have number 3, just to make it a nice round number? Ndate Tsepo, you are noted already. Do we have a 3rd hand anywhere? Yes, please do go ahead.
Okay, my name is Tsepo Ikanem from the SABC. For the issue of the configuration of the executive, has any thought been given of the possible cuts of the number of ministers and deputy ministers, because as your critics of the ANC ruling government has been saying that much of the fiscus is going to saving what is being determined as a bloated cabinet. So on that issue, can we get clarity as to is there any kind of a consideration for that? And the other issue of the relation between the party and the state, you are saying that there is going to be a re-examination of that kind of a relation. Are you able to give us more clarity about what you basically mean about that? And the other, lately, on the issue of maybe your quest to regain control of the captured or the big metros under the opposition DA and or coalition, what kind of new strategies do you have in mind in terms of making sure that you're going to wrestle them back to the control of the ruling party? Thank you.
How are we going to recapture that? Yes.
Mr. Dodo spoke about, I think, the issue that you've been speaking about for a very long time of provinces, review of provinces. What does it exactly mean? So is there a situation where provinces will be reduced? If they will be reduced, how many will they be? So are you able to reach finality on this matter? Because I know it's been spoken about for a very long time.
So where was I wrong?
Part of the constitutional amendment talks to an MEC that appoints people in key positions. I'm wondering if your subcommittee has looked at this and how would it work in terms of that? Because I see you also talk about monitoring and evaluation of people that you've deployed in key positions in the state.
Thank you. There are no brainwaves? Okay. Sorry, can I just take one more question? Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Moses Moyo. Good afternoon. My name is Moses Moyo from the Inner City Gazette. On governance in the cities, we've seen one municipality in Gauteng taking a government department to court on the issues of immigration. Is it something this committee has deliberated on? and what is their take on the municipality's position?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. On the last question, I'll start with that one. I don't know whether you're asking because I'm the Minister of Immigration and Population and all sorts of things. This is the Legislature and Governance Subcommittee. That's a matter for the Peace and Stability Subcommittee. But maybe just to say that as a department, we are trying to improve our systems on immigration. But also with the mooted establishment of a border management agency, we will be able to ensure that our borders are less porous. So the issues of immigration will be, on illegal immigrants, will be taken care of once we're able to get that past the National Council of Provinces. I will ask the other members of the team, because we only have 1 hour, just to be very brief in their responses to issue, but I'd like to respond to the one on provinces because we can just lay it to rest. If you remember, in the last few conferences, it was said that the president must establish a commission, which will then, the commission, amongst other things, will come out to determine the number of provinces. Whether we reduce or we increase will really be dependent on the work of that commission. And the presidency would have relied on the Department of Cooperative Governance to deal with this issue and assist in the establishment of the commission with the framework in place that would have been developed. So I think Comrade Andries very, very succinctly will be able to deal with this one. On the reduction of a bloated executive, Dati Ikaning, we have said that what we need to look at is the broader macro configuration of the state. And if you are to determine the number of departments or the number of ministries in the executive, that should be determined by the policy outcomes. So if you have 15 policy outcomes, it goes without saying that there should be 15 ministries, or if within those policy outcomes, the sub-outcomes are as priority or as big as that they would require for another ministry or a department to be established, that is what we're talking about. So it's within the ambit of our conversation around the macro configuration of the state. So it's just not a standalone on its own. It really would have to be determined by the number of policy outcomes. It's the case with most countries around the world. What determines the number of ministries is the policy outcomes of those governments. On the party and the state, I'll ask Comrade Binki just to deal with that one, and Comrade Andries to very, very succinctly on the review of provinces. I'm very careful with lawyers. When they speak very slowly, and they take forever. And then Comrade Andries, if you could, Comrade Obet, if you could deal with regaining lost ground on the lost municipalities. And Comrade Faith, maybe if you just want to add on the macro configuration of the state as it relates to the reduction of ministries. We'll start with Comrade Andries.
Do it from here.
If you could please come here.
Yeah, he's coming. Yeah. Don't direct me in my conference.
Chairperson, thank you very much, and members of the media. I think before, and indeed, Chairperson, I am going to answer very thoroughly and circumspectly. No, I think it's very important because whenever this issue gets raised, immediately everyone focuses on the number of provinces. And the big thing is that the ANC wants to reduce the number of provinces, and then implicit in that, or even sometimes stated explicitly, is that basically we want to gerrymander and that we want to reconfigure provinces in a way that electorally will be to the ANC's advantage and to the disadvantage of others. The reality is that that assertion is devoid of truth. The reality is that there's a very complex debate that has taken place over successive national conferences to say that what we need to get right is an optimal configuration of the powers and functions of the three spheres of government. Are those powers and functions correctly located and distributed? Are there not perhaps functions that overlap in ways that actually produce bottlenecks, that inhibit service delivery, that inhibit governance instead of acting in their favor? So that would constitute the task of a presidential commission to look into those matters thoroughly, to make recommendations. Obviously, any recommendations, especially those that would have constitutional implications, would have to go to Parliament and be subjected to very thorough processes. And there would need to be a national consensus around those matters. The Constitution is very explicit and outlines quite an elaborate process for the amendment of any provincial boundaries. Just to say in conclusion that some of the preliminary work has been done by COGTA in terms of starting to outline what would constitute terms of reference, methodologies, etc., for such a commission, but ultimately it is something that, in terms of the resolution, would need to be appointed by the President. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. The purpose of every party, obviously, is to win power and to be in charge and to be in control. And I know you use the word to wrestle back the lost municipalities. Yes, that is the intention, that is the agenda, and whether you call it wrestle or recapture or win back the three metros in particular, the agenda is already in motion, and we are consolidating it. And then I think you have already seen even some of the motions of no confidence. And it's just unlikely that the municipalities did not want secret ballots, and yet they insisted and went to court around the national space where they had to go for a secret ballot. But service delivery is becoming a big challenge in those municipalities. The ratepayers are no longer happy because the administration that had promised to do better than the African National Congress is no more doing so. And therefore, this gives us an opportunity to then begin to engage on those issues that the ratepayers and the citizens of those cities are raising, and obviously punctuate them in the council, raise them strongly, and with a determination that if not now, in 2021 probably we'll then win back the municipalities. But if an opportunity does arise, why not? We are ready, and I think the African National Congress program will definitely be that, to become an effective opposition that then begins to bring sharper those particular issues, and is one way of regaining power by raising the very issues that the municipalities are failing to do under the coalition governments or opposition, the Democratic Alliance in particular. Thank you.
Thank you. There was a question about the other municipality taking government to court that the chairperson of the subcommittee has raised. I think one upfront should raise the fact that it's undesirable for a sphere of government to take another sphere of government to court. We are raising it based because there is an act that was promulgated to that effect, the Intergovernmental Relations Frame Act of 2005. It's under those circumstances wherein you have exhausted all internal remedies, but I think through the act itself, it creates a framework wherein if there are disputes, we are then encouraged to resolve them within the state itself, local government, provincial government, and national government. The other issue that the chairperson of the subcommittee was raising is about the reconfiguration of the state. You'll recall during the current MTSF 2014 to 2019, there's chapter 13 in the NDP that talks about building a capable state. Indeed, there's progress that we've made in terms of that, to say there's a lot that we're doing. In doing so, once all those items as listed in chapter 13 of the NDP are fulfilled, that's when we're going to consider that, because that's why there was a specific chapter, and it's part of our outcome as members of this subcommittee to make sure that then we deliver in terms of that, building a capable state, like the issue of the graduate framework. It's a whole lot of, to say, making the public service a career of choice. So once we do that, and there's a report that we're working on that we'll present to conference. We're going to be advised of that, but I can agree with you, there's work in progress so that we are able then to build a capable state. Once that's done, then we'll be able to then look at the reconfiguration. But I can assure you this is work in progress. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm not going to take long. We are very clear here in terms of the relationship between the party and the state. We are saying that conference has to examine the relationship between the party and the state. In this instance, we are saying, I'm sure you are all aware of the fact that the resolutions as are taken by the conference becomes a policy. And therefore, we here emphasize the situation whereby those that are deployed in government will necessarily take necessary measures and precautions and make sure that they implement to the latter all those policies that are adopted by the National Conference. And actually here, it's about speeding up of implementation of those resolutions of the conference and making sure that there is service delivery at the end of the day. So here we are trying to harmonize the relationship between the party and the state and make sure that those who are deployed do exactly what they are mandated to do and are deployed to do in government. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm aware that we do have two questions that we still need to answer, which I will ask that when the panel comes back up, they speak to them. First one is around how are we going to regain the lost ground in the municipalities. Then the second one, Mahlati, if you could please just rephrase. Oh, did you answer that? My apologies. Mahlati, could you please just rephrase your question for us insofar as the constitutional amendment is concerned?
Basically, one of the constitutional amendments that I saw refers to the ANC. One of the proposals around the ANC appointing key officials in all the three spheres of government. Yeah, that's the one.
And the question?
Basically, the question is, I mean, what would constitute the key appointment and how would it actually work?
Do we have any other questions? Because this will be the last round.
I don't know whether these are related, but I might ask it as well. The issue of corporate governance. So I understand it's also going to feature prominently, and particularly when you look at issues like Steinhofer. So how are you going to make sure that you look at that? And is it really the prominent issue that you would spend a lot of time on so that you get everything right?
Thank you. I have a hand, Tsepo, and then I have a hand, ma'am, in front, Inner City Gazette, and then the last hand. This is the last hand on this side. In that order, please. Yes, sir.
Okay. On the issue of strategic streamlining of governments and the enforcement of policy and legislation, I mean, this has been something that has been recurring for over the years since ANC has been the ruling or the governing party in South Africa, where you had this kind of disjuncture in terms of how ministers relate to their GGs, those infightings, and people also implementing policies that are negating the objectives or the outcomes of the policy conferences of the ANC. So you have this ongoing fights within the state between officials and politicians. So is that really a situation or a consideration or something that is really troubling the ANC if you talk about the issue of making sure that policy and legislation is enforced? Even when you go to parliament, you see portfolio committees or maybe fighting against ministers and vice versa. So, like we are seeing what is pinning out in parliament, how are you able to harmonize those kind of leadership from the caucus up to the executive, including municipalities, so that what we see on television doesn't seem like there's no policy cohesion or directive as to what the ANC really stands for? And again, the issue of corporate governance, the future of we've seen, I think the example is out in here where they don't want to be part of that, but we know that the national board that coordinating local governance. When we don't have big metros participating in that entity, are we going to see your objectives or maybe the government from cabinet level, from national level, not being embraced in key metros like where we are in Gauteng? Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, in front, the lady is in front. Yes, thank you.
Thanks. Gay Davis, Eyewitness News. Just a question about the high-level panel. I just wondered whether delegates are going to be briefed by Khalema Motlanthe, and to what extent there's going to be discussion around the high-level panel report. And then on the institutions supporting democracy, I just wondered, that wasn't mentioned unless I wasn't listening properly, whether there's going to be debate there in terms of rationalizing the number of ISDs and Chapter 9 institutions rather, and whether the consideration will be given to a single body that will incorporate the Human Rights Commission and others. And then just in terms of what Obed was saying about winning back these metros and lost municipalities, in terms of the ANC's role as opposition, because coming from Lorne, one has witnessed difficulty on the part of the ANC to actually make purchase there as an opposition party. I think it is difficult for a majority party to do that. So I'm interested in the thinking along those lines. And then the last thing is on the municipal funding model. So we've got a system where municipalities depend on payments of rates and services, electricity, water, and so on, in order to function. There's an inability to pay. There are issues with the rates and tax base. There's also, obviously, corruption. But is it not time for a review of the municipal funding model? I mean, is this really the system that is going to work? The amount of attention that's paid on putting capacity into municipalities, an enormous amount of effort and work and money spent on that, but we don't see the benefits. So I'm interested in what the thinking is there. Thanks very much. Apologies for that banging on.
Okay, thank you. It's a representative from the staff. There's something I didn't see here. I don't know, I could be wrong, but I would assume that it should have been here. The issue of the electoral system. I understand that some constituencies of the ANC, including Gauteng, have been proposing that the Electoral Act should be amended so that it's not only a proportional representation, but also constituency system must be also included. But I just wanted to think around it, especially given the fact that there are also some provinces who are actually adamant, expressed, saying it must not be changed.
Thank you very much. Behind you? Yes, covered. Okay, if I could have the microphone moving to the end, please. All the way, so sorry. My apologies. There's a lady in the corner there. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I don't know if the panel will be able to answer this question, but it's on the Eastern Cape.
Please introduce yourself, my dear.
Sorry, President Akora from AN7. It's on the Eastern Cape PC's court judgment being dismissed. Just wanted to find out if the party will be accepting the court judgment, and what will the party do to try and bring together the province that hasn't been in unity in this in this past few stages, as well as what is the way forward in trying to add factions within the ANC in all other provinces ahead of the elective conference. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we agree, though, that those last two questions don't belong in this briefing? We will have continuous briefings with the SG, ZZ, and the DSG just to address some of those issues. Is this in there?
Thank you very much, Kusana. Could I just ask that Comrade Chippy responds to the municipal funding question that was asked? And on the high-level report by Comrade Khalima Mutlante, I'm not sure if he's coming to conference, but he would not make a presentation to conference because having looked at the program of conference, there is no slot for that type of presentation to be made. But suffice to say, in the press statement, we actually do speak to that, to say some of the issues that are highlighted there are issues that the ANC always talks about in any case. And those are the issues that are part of our conversation in LNG in our commission at conference. So those issues will be discussed, but also we will tease out some of the matters that would have arisen out of that high-level panel report. On corporate governance, I think that question is one of the most fundamental questions, actually, when it comes to ensuring that citizens in general, all round, are protected, including their pensions. That Parliament should not only preoccupy itself with holding the executive accountable only, but it should also take into account those matters that affect citizens that fall outside the ambit of the state. I know for a fact that according to reports from Parliament, Scopa would be calling in Steinhoff on this matter. And I think it shouldn't just end there, because if you remember, there are other parties that have been called by Parliament to deal with matters that actually affect citizens. So we are calling for, and as I would have said earlier on, we're calling for Parliament to look broadly throughout society and not just hold the executive accountable, but also look at matters that relate to what it is that affects our citizens out there. On the cadre development policy, what we are speaking to here also includes what we have raised, Mahlatsi, on the deployment of cadres of the African National Congress. Now, from our part as legislature and governments, it becomes very important to ensure that there's a cadre policy in place that deals with the support of people who are deployed, that deals with political education and training, that deals with academic training and education, but also support that is given in the form of further development and deployment of others to support cadres that are deployed, whether it's in the legislatures, it's in the executive, or wherever in government. Now we have, as the LNG, a priority requisite because we are responsible for ensuring that there's transformation in the sector, there is also accountability, there is also governance. So we deal with that from a cadre development policy perspective. I will ask Comrade Thabo to deal with some of the issues that have been dealt with in previous conferences, which questions are coming up now. And I think that was just between the two of them. If there's been any other questions that still would require a response, other members of the panel will take them on. You have to come here. You have to come here.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to Gay for the question. Yes, I mean, the issue of municipal finances is a big issue at conference. A lot of people raised it, and part of the policy conference resolution is to call for a fundamental relook at the whole municipal funding model. So that's something that, I think is quite close to a lot of people's hearts at conference. Just in doing that relook, we are very mindful of the amount that municipalities owe, particularly to water boards and ESCOM and to other utilities. as well as the huge amounts households and businesses owe to local government. Andries was showing me a press statement now that showed about 143 billion as at the end of September was owed to municipalities. So that whole idea of a sort of self-funding model of local government backed up with some intergovernmental grants, I think needs a frank, proper assessment. Just to note that since 1994, government has massively expanded the amount of money that's given to local government. I think intergovernmental grants grew tenfold under the ANC government over that period. So it's not something we've been idle about. We've massively expanded the amount of funding going into local government, but it's clear that there's still some issues that have got to be looked at.
Good afternoon. The question that was asked about the ISD's institution supporting democracy, I think we have considered the ad hoc committee report and adopted certain sections of it in our conference, the 53rd conference. So Parliament is busy implementing those, especially that specific one that you referred to about, creating a single human rights body. So the presiding officers in Parliament are working on that particular implementation. So is the decision that we have also taken around the electoral system. In Mangaung, we concluded on that thing of the issues of the PR vis-a-vis, and I think we had mandated our comrades and colleagues here at COCTA to review that system and ensure that there is a fair balance. However, I think it has been proven to be a relatively tricky matter because it is anchored on some provisions of the Constitution. However, we've taken that decision that we needed to review, especially the Municipal Electoral Act, to be able that we create the kind of a balance that is required there. Mahlatsi, there's a question that they keep on running away from, which you are asking. But there's a deployment committee in the ANC. It has been there since ever. It deals with the deployments in various areas of governance. All what we are talking about here as LNG, we're talking about once you have been deployed, what is it that you're expected to do? Who do you account to? And how do we monitor your performance? And then how do we make sure that now that we're being deployed, here is an ANC policy, go and implement it, and then this is how you must implement it, including this is the support that we are giving you as the ANC to be able to be effective. So we're dealing with that part. We're not dealing with who and how people must be deployed in various levels. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I will deal with just two issues. One, the future of SALGA. SALGA exists. It will continue to exist. There are 257 municipalities in South Africa, majority of which are all members of SALGA, including the 8 metros. What has been the observing issues is that the DA, as a coalition government in the 3 metros out of the 8, it's still a member of SALGA, but they go per issue. Some meetings they go if there are issues that are of interest to it, but they may then not go to other meetings where they do not have an interest. And I think that's their choice. But they have not disaffiliated from SALGA, and therefore they are still members of SALGA. So therefore, that issue, SALGA is engaged on, and then they are continuing to function as a body, as an organization, quite cohesively, I must say, because majority of the municipalities are still there. And on the issue of the being an effective opposition, It's not the first time that the ANC is in opposition. It started in KwaZulu-Natal, if you remember, in 1994. The ANC was just in the opposition, but it was able to be an effective opposition party until such time in the next elections they were able to increase their margins. But even when they had increased their margin, it was not an overall winning, and they had to then get smaller parties to form a new government after in 1999. And then through that, then they then later emerged to be a majority. So it can happen that you are today a minority and you're in the opposition, and then based on your effective opposition, bringing issues on the table effectively, appealing to the masses about the manner in which you raise the issues, for them to be able to see that the other one who said was going to do better than you, then realizes that they lose that particular plot within the voters, and the voters then swings, and then they can then go back to the African National Congress. And we are hoping, therefore, that in these 3 municipalities, that agenda is unfolding, that agenda is coming, and it will be effective. And we are also sending our comrades to go and learn from others. I mean, they come from London already, where they met in the UK, where they met with the Labour Party around being an effective opposition. Quite a useful points emerge, and they are sharing them with all other ANC structures within those areas where we are in minority, including Cape Town. So it can happen that we will really come back, and will definitely do so. And that is why I say the agenda is unfolding, and we are focused, and then we will definitely emerge.
Thank you very much. I'm going to deal with the question regarding the constitutional amendment, and then secondly also the electoral system. Firstly, with regard to the constitutional amendment, I think let's be clear up front that what we're talking about is an amendment to the ANC constitution, not to the constitution of the country. The constitution, the amendment in question reads as follows, and it's an amendment to Rule 12.2.22, and that deals with the powers and functions of the NEC. So what it says is that the NEC should have the power and the duty to appoint and remove from office all public representatives at national, provincial, and local levels in government, and manage the performance of such public representatives in terms of their deployment contracts. So it's not talking about key positions or anything. We're talking here about elected public representatives, not officials in the public service or in any other institution. We're saying that the NEC should put in place systems to monitor the effective performance of those public representatives, to monitor, evaluate, to provide them with support, and where necessary, to remove them if they're not living up to the trust and the expectations that the people have put in them. The second question is regarding the electoral system. I think there again one must distinguish 2 areas. The first is that there have been resolutions to say that at a national and a provincial level, we should institute a hybrid system similar to the one that we have at local government, where you have both PR and constituencies. I think conference has discussed that matter. It has taken decisions in the past on that. But of course, as we know, the ANC is an organization that is continuously living and learning and from experience, and our policy discussions are ongoing. So certainly no matter is ever closed forever. We would continue to look at that. The second aspect of the electoral system is the local government electoral system, and in particular the formula that is used to allocate seats. There have been resolutions in the past to say that we must review that. Already there is legislation before Parliament that is dealing with some very technical aspects of how so-called remainder votes are calculated and allocated. I think many of you would be aware that the Democratic Alliance has recently, after the Metsimaholo by-elections, actually threatened to go to court on exactly that point. We believe that the points that they are raising, or at least some of them, would be dealt with partly by those amendments that are currently before for Parliament. The other aspect is the broader formula, and there COGTA was tasked to do certain research that research is being done at the moment. And really what it revolves around is saying that is to look at where the Constitution says that the outcome of an election must in broad terms be proportional. What exactly does that mean? And how can one make adjustments to the formula that maintain that constitutional injunction for broad proportionality and at the same time give an outcome and a seat allocation which parties would regard as fair. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am.
Just clarity on the state of the SOE. There's a line that says, and the executive taking full control in management.
Is that a new question, Mahlati?
Yes, sorry. Sorry, it's been an hour, we're not out yet.
Okay.
Yeah, the executive taking full control in managing their portfolios and SOE. Just if you could explain what exactly does that mean? And given the sorry state of our SOEs, there's very little that you're proposing in how to actually sort out the list.
Let's take the first part of the question. What does that exactly mean in terms of the proposal?
SOEs have boards, but the final person that is accountable to Parliament on the functioning of those SOEs are actually the ministers responsible for those portfolios. So we are really calling for more accountability on the side of boards and also the executive in these SOEs, but also to ensure that the ministers themselves take it upon themselves to ensure that these boards do actually account to them. Because in certain instances you find boards saying we don't account to the minister, but the minister is the one that is ultimately accountable to Parliament on the functioning of any board. So those are some of the matters that we're looking at to say, let that control be there with regards to expenditure and all other things that are conferred on the minister as per the PFMA, or also legislation that establishes a particular entity or a particular SOE. So that's really what we're saying. It's more around accountability than anything.
Thank you. Can we just make the point that this briefing obviously just outlines the proposals that are going to conference. Once we are at conference, there will be in-depth deliberations on a lot of these issues and other issues that may arise. So I want to thank the committee led by the chairperson, Comrade Ayanda Dlolo, for making this briefing and yourselves for attending. If I could just do very quickly some announcements. Tomorrow, we are starting the process of the collection of the media accreditation tags. This is from 9 o'clock to 6 o'clock, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. There will be no accreditation on the 16th because the credentials will be presented on the 16th, so we won't be accrediting media. We're also requesting that you personally come because we will be taking photographs, so you can't send somebody to take a picture on your behalf. Other than that, I understand that all emails now confirming success have now gone through for the applications, so I trust all members of the media know where they stand with regards to the accreditation. And then the final issue, we have received, as Comrade Zizi has said, more than 4,500 applications for media. Not everybody will be allowed. Already some have been rejected, and you are requested to please look at your lists further and identify those who will be allowed into plenary, the red zone as we call it. We can't accommodate everybody in there. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you tomorrow. We are discussing education, health, and science and technology, which will be led by Comrade Naledi Pando, the head of the subcommittee. Thank you.
So delegates, so media are going to outnumber delegates?
They do, actually. They do. Sorry, it's at Nasrec train station here.
We don't have any
No, I'm sure I'm sure Nati?
Unless you change your image.
Mahlati says, Nati